One thing I've always loved about early console games was their ability to tread new ground and to try to utilise the hardware in ways which gamers were not expecting, or to try and dazzle you with new visuals that just weren't possible on previous generation hardware. Landing in 1997 from Video System was Aero Fighters Assault, the 6th game in the Sonic Wings series, and it billed itself as the first of the N64's flight sim shooters. It was also the one and only game in the series that had 3D graphics. On paper, the game promised multiplayer modes, different characters with their own aircraft, tons of weapons, and of course huge boss battles. Most importantly though, was just how good screenshots of the game looked. In the early days before online video streaming, the only time you got a sense of how a game would be was from looking at magazine screenshots and reading the previews. On rare occasions you would catch a glimpse of a game on TV or get a bundled VHS promo tape with a magazine. It was fair to say that I was really looking forward to this game. Taking control of a peacekeeping United Nations force against high-tech terrorists sounded great, and the storyline also piqued my interest because the terrorists have melted the ice caps and have flooded major cities. With much of the world now flooded, you go up against their jets, subs, frigates and air bases that are hovering above the sky. Whilst it was Video System publishing the game, what made me really want to play it was the fact it was developed by Paradigm Entertainment. Being a huge fan of Pilot Wings, I was eagerly anticipating the game's release from the same developer, and in my mind I expected it to be like Pilot Wings but with weapons, and that it sounded exactly like my type of game. If you've forgotten just how good the studio were on the N64, just take a look at the list of games they created. Sadly though, Aero Fighters Assault is a prime example of when a great studio releases a subpar game. Quite simply, this is a dull experience pretty much from start to finish. The one-player campaign sees you take on a range of missions spanning varied locations and with a good mix of objectives. The core balance of the game is way off though. Some missions seem to be a continual end of seek and destroy objectives which take far too long to complete. Other missions can be over in less than a minute, making those levels feel more like filler. The enemies too have a lot of variation, but some take a ridiculous amount of damage before you can take them down. It's not uncommon to have to make dozens of passes over frigates, dropping pretty much all of your arsenal on them each time in order for them to sink. I do like a challenge in a game, but many times in here it feels like this was intentionally done to draw out the length of the game, so it should take you a little bit longer than normal to finish this one. Perhaps the biggest gameplay letdown though was the simple fact there's no real sense of speed. The game plods along with a poor frame rate, taking away any sense that you are apparently flying one of the most powerful futuristic aircraft ever made. When this is combined with the huge amount of enemies, often overcrowding the screen, you get a game which grinds to a halt and often dips into single-digit frame rates. The saving grace of the game is a fantastic engine it's built on. You can clearly tell that the studio has a lot of experience in flight engines, and when playing the game you can bank, roll, dive, climb perfectly, and the enemies have some excellent AI and tactics to try and take you down. As I mentioned previously though, with so many enemies on the screen, the game never really feels like a true flight sim, and the gameplay is more arcade-like. The game attempts to find the right balance between the two, but it ends up missing the mark in both aspects. The impressive screenshots that splattered pages of magazines prior to the game's release were a thing of beauty. Sadly, they must have hired one of the best agencies to produce their marketing material, because in-game things take a turn for the worse. The grainy textures make even the most basic of structures look like cardboard cutouts, and water, which makes up a large part of the game due to its storyline, it all looks very static and has no realism whatsoever. Later in the game, when you move to the Arctic based missions though, things do look a little bit better with a huge amount of additional pop-up though. It really does begin to test your patience when looking for smaller targets that seemingly show up out of nowhere. The tight controls do help to keep you feeling control at all times, but sadly the rest of the game is not quite as polished. The audio in the game is not actually that bad. Like in Star Fox 64, your teammates will spout out one-liners during battle. Sure, they get old fairly quickly, and some of the lines of dialogue are cringeworthy, but the sample rate is actually really good, and it makes it sound clear and easy to listen to. The in-game music, on the other hand, is a strange mix. It's very Japanese stylised and unfortunately is very low quality. The first few missions have good audio background music, but then by the end of the game it trails off into some terrible scores, but thankfully you can turn it off in the options menu. Aero Fighters Assault was not the studio's follow-up to Pilot Wings that I, and no doubt many of you listening, were hoping for. Whereas Pilot Wings had charm, character and excellent gameplay, Aero Fighters Assault strayed far too away from what made their debut N64 title so impressive. So with dull multiplayer, a dull dogfighting mode, uninspired single-player gameplay and below-par audio and visuals, this really isn't a game which will appeal to many people. Harrier 2001, which was due to be a spiritual successor to Aero Fighters Assault, was in development and the screenshots too looked impressive, but it was eventually cancelled right before the studio went bankrupt. So love it or loathe it, I'd love to know what you made of Aero Fighters Assault. Like me, do you consider this the biggest blip in Paradigm's N64 games library, or do you think it offers something unlike anything else on the console? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section down below, and until next time.